In a world where anyone can have a podcast, Peter Von Panda is one of them. Rants are taken to a whole new level. This is the Peter Von Panda Podcast, a giant waste of time.
All right, Panda Nation. Hey, Peter Von Panda here. I just want to talk to you about something that I was actually kind of surprised at. I'm kind of not surprised, but I think I figured out what the problem is. So I was reading an article like this, and it wasn't this one, but it's really easy to find this information all out there. Infiniti sales have slumped, and not slumped in a small way, like 50, 60% down, which is kind of crazy to me. It's kind of crazy, but also not necessarily crazy surprising. Oh, looks like I got a call coming in there. Oh, whatever. You know the Infiniti car brand. It's the upmarket brand from Nissan, and so they reuse a lot of those platforms to come up with the Infiniti cars. It's the equivalent of Lexus to Toyota. Right out of the gate in the 90s when these cars came out, Infiniti was always, I think, a little bit of the underdog in that market. You know, for whatever reason, Lexus really seemed to kind of mimic Mercedes. Infiniti, I think, kind of tried to mimic more BMW to make their upscale brand. Maybe I would say Acura has been really the black sheep of that, higher end brand for, Honda. In that regard, I don't know that people look at Acura in the same way. So I think Infiniti slots a little bit between Lexus and Acura. But I've always really liked the Infiniti brand. You know, they really kind of lost their way in the 2000s when they were basically badge engineered Nissans. I mean, the Infiniti i30 or whatever it was exactly the same car as the Nissan Maxima. I mean, even the interior was the same, and they just had like badging differences. It was terrible, and I don't know that they've kind of ever recovered fully from that. But right now, Infiniti has some really nice cars, and the fact that they are losing ground, 50, 60%, 51% down on the QX50, is a little surprising to me because I think they look pretty good. When I checked them out at the auto show, they have a nice design, a nice aesthetic about them. And on top of that, I thought they were pretty good value. So to get like the QX60, and if we go here to the Infiniti webpage, the QX60 is their coupe. That's kind of one of the cars I was looking at. It's not the car I was going to buy, but when I was comparing that to like the Lexus coupe, or even, let's talk about, maybe they should work on their website because anything I'm clicking here, it doesn't seem to be working. Whatever. So can't even show you. But it's, it's two-door, the Q50, it's the Q60. But for whatever reason, and I'm actually going to need this to work in order to show you what I'm talking about here. The one of the things that I liked was that I thought they were pretty good values for what you got. Now, this is a pretty nice looking car. That's what I would say. It's a pretty nice looking car starting at $40,000. And, when you look at the Lexus coupes or the Mercedes SL, I think you get a lot of that same effect. You don't quite get the panache you do with some of those other ones, but it's a nice looking car for quite a bit less than those other cars. Now, on top of that, I have seen new car sales prices and leases that are significantly lower than these numbers. And if you were to buy one of these cars new, nearly new, man, the resale value on them is terrible. And that kind of surprises me because I actually have some neighbors with some Infinitis, and they actually both have, shockingly, the Infiniti Q50, which is a great car. I think it's a nice looking car. I wouldn't say it's like the best looking car in its class, and in the interior in particular, I think is a little pedestrian. I might just show that to you here. It's nothing super, super nice, but it's pretty nice. It's pretty good. And when you're talking about a car that is basically like Chrysler priced or Ford priced, but has a little bit more upscale feel to it, I thought that's pretty nice. So now you might be thinking, well, Pete, if you're gushing over these cars so much, why aren't they selling better? And I'm going to get to that here in a second because I think the thing that is hurting all of these is something I'm not showing you yet. And in fact, I just want to go here because the Q70 is actually the car that really interested me. I get, look, let's just take a look at this price here. $51,000. It's not a cheap car. It's like their higher end sedan, but it looks actually pretty Maserati-ish to me. And the interior in particular, I think is really, really nice on these. So what Infiniti got right here, I think, is like some stitching here, these kind of panels on the door, some nice curves. They really got this middle kind of very organic, kind of bulbous, curved shape to the center console, right, and the center console down here. So I think that all looks really good, actually. And when I look at this and I'm like, oh, I know people really like this. I do think like up here around the vents and right up here on the switchgear, I've noticed even on the larger SUVs, it's a little harder plastic, so you'll lose a little bit of that illusion around the screen here. That screen could fill this whole section out here a little better and all that. But overall, I think it's pretty good. And like I said, for the price, it's a pretty good deal, I think, relative to some of the other ones. And the Q70L is actually the larger one. The Q70 is just the normal one, and I'm assuming that's a couple $1,000s less. Yeah. But the L gives you almost a limousine-like back. But here's what I think the problem is, and this affects all the cars in the lineup. And I'm going to go to here to vehicles, and I'm going to go to crossovers and SUVs. And this is the problem. Let's start with the QX30. And I will throw out a disclaimer. I might be a little wrong on what some of these represent. But the QX30 is only a $30,000 car. I would think the small SUV or the small crossover from Infiniti would be a hot seller. And it might be, but this is where I think the problem is. I think this car is ugly. It does have the design aesthetic that Infiniti is known for, but I believe the Infiniti QX30 is a rebrand, kind of a rebadging of a Mercedes GLE platform or whatever, so you can see here, this does not look like the other interiors, and that I think is the reason, is that they are basically purchasing and reskinning the Mercedes platform. My bigger problem with it is, if we go to the exterior look here, I think this car is not good looking. It does not look like an SUV or a crossover to me. It looks like a hot hatch, a station wagon. And that's not the kind of car that people that are looking at this brand are trying to get, right? I'm not trying to get a Volkswagen Golf R. I'm not trying to get, the Civic Si, right? And this just looks too squashed down. It looks too flattened. It looks too car-like. If I were to chop off from the C-pillar here, you would think this is a sedan. So when you call it a crossover, the things that I expect is it to be taller, look and ride more like an SUV, and it just have a more upright look. And because it's so long, it looks like the Mazda 3 or 6 to me. It just does not look very Infiniti-ish. Now, if we go up to the other versions here, and if I go back to vehicles, crossovers, oh, laughable. Let's go to the QX50. This is the one that should be crushing it. And again, 37 grand, I don't think this is bad. But when you look at the pictures of this car, and I'm not saying that I'm just only looking at pictures. I've seen some of these in the parking lot at work. The interior is okay. But again, when you look at, and I would actually say their gallery here is not that great, and I think maybe because they know they're ugly, they're just too long, and they look like cars, not SUVs. People want, on the crossover side, for them to feel bigger, to feel like trucks almost, but get all of the advantages of a car, good ride, good mileage, all of that stuff. And to me, they're even hiding the back in some of these things, right? They're giving you some attractive angles. Look at that one. Like, this is a really low angle to make it look more upright, but you can see that this thing is short. I parked next to one of these in the parking lot the other day, and I didn't like it at all because it looks like a car without the back end. I mean, they just don't look particularly good. And here, if we go back to vehicles and crossovers and SUVs and the QX60, again, this one, which is their bigger one, and actually has a third row. Again, it just looks like a station wagon. It's not that tall. It should have a little bit shorter or more brutish front end, a little more round. I even think the cars look a little more muscular. I do like the interiors here, but this should be a car I think people clamor to, but it's just too long. It's got too much Dodge Journey and not enough like Jeep Grand Cherokee kind of style to me, right? It just looks, in some ways it looks athletic, but it just doesn't have quite the stuff. Now, for $44,000, this should be a really hot seller because of the price point and because of the features and because overall it's pretty nice. But when I'm looking at these sales numbers and these cars are just getting crushed, obviously there's something going on. And then even if we go to the crossover, and I would call this one an SUV because I think it's just like the Nissan Titan. This one is nice. The QX80, I've seen a lot of these around. I've driven in the previous version, which was like QX56 or whatever it was. And I really like these. In fact, look at this interior, man. That's killer. And I thought they always did a nice job with this. It was like a full-sized SUV, but I thought they did a nice job of having, some organic, some shapes to it, some details around the outside that really looked good. It didn't look blocky. It didn't look like an afterthought. It was really nice. And inside, they were really nice too. So I don't know if this one is struggling with sales like some of the other ones, but it's got a nice shape and it's big and it has a lot of presence. Like I said, the Nissan Armada, you get almost that same interior with a little bit different exterior. So I think that's a great value too. But if Infiniti is getting crushed, which they are, this is where I would look at what the problem is. These crossover and SUVs just don't look particularly good. Now, the funny thing to me is this crossover, the QX50, I believe is built on their Murano platform. So it's really just a reskin of the Murano. And I don't know how well the Murano is doing, but I kind of feel like it's doing all right. So I just, I know that maybe the look is more fluid or a little bit more like a wind or something like that. But, I think that they need to improve the SUV. I think that's where all the sales are. That's what brings people in. And the fact that their cars look pretty good just means, you're not drawing people into the showroom. Like, I think that's a smart looking car. I think it's better looking than the Ghibli, as good as looking as the Maserati Quattroporte. And, I think a ton of value and, I would even say more reliable than the exotics. And, when you compare it, say, to, a Mercedes S-Class, and I get that there's going to be a little bit different competitors, but if I were looking for a full-size SUV, I like this Q70. I've been in some of them and I think they're pretty great. They were previously like the M37, the M46. The naming convention I also think sucks. That's not helping them in the near term here, but I think it's the crossovers that are killing them. So if you're listening to Infiniti, my hope is that you go ahead and you work on those crossovers, man. Get those more attractive, and I think that's going to help turn around some of your ails. Like, look at this. That's like a Subaru off-road or an Audi all-road. Neither of which, well, the Subaru probably sells pretty well, but the Audi all-road is certainly not a huge seller. I just, other than the big wheel arches, the big clearance here, I mean, there's nothing particularly upright about it. And if I took that out and made this like a car, like a road-hugging car here, I don't think anyone would ever say that's a crossover. That's the problem. Anyway, that's my rant for today. Definitely check out my YouTube channel, Peter Von Panda, or the podcast here too. Peter Von Panda. Out.
This is the Peter Von Panda podcast. A giant waste of time.